A very good day to one and all. This is Miss A. Krishna Sundar, Assistant Professor, Department of English, KAHM Unity Women's College, Manjeri. This is a presentation based on Anita Nair's Ladies Coupe, and this presentation will be dealing with a very short summary of the entire novel along with the introduction of the major characters. So here goes the storyline. This is a story of a middle-aged lady whose name is Akila Deshuri. Akila is 45 years old and she is still unmarried and without a family. And as the novel begins, we find that Akila has decided to travel alone to Kanyakumari for the very first time. She books a ticket in a ladies' coupe and she is planning to travel. And during this journey, she meets five other passengers who share the very same coupe. And the other five passengers are one is Janaki Prabhakar, the second character is Prabha Devi, the third character Margaret Shanti, fourth Sheila Vasudevan, and finally Marikolanda. So these are the five other women characters that Akila meets during the journey, and they start sharing their experiences, their ambitions, their stories, everything to each other. And as a result, there comes a transformation for Akila. So this is the crux of the entire novel. Now, coming to Janaki Prabhagar, she is an old lady who has completed around 40 years of marriage. So she has a very typical kind of expression that a conventional old woman might hold. Then comes Prabha Devi. She is a middle aged lady. She has a home, including her husband and two children. She comes from a very rich background. Then there is Marikulanda, who's coming from a very backward atmosphere, and she has a totally different story to describe. Then there is Margaret Shandy, who's again a middle aged woman, but who is strikingly more different than others. She has a belief that a woman has her own identity, and therefore a woman need not depend on her husband always. Now, the last character is Sheila Vasudevan. Now, she is a young girl, a teenage girl who's just doing her ninth standard, and she talks about the world from her perspective. Putting all these stories together, Akila is finally able to bring a solid decision in her life. So, what is Akila's story? Akila is 45 years old and she is undertaking a journey to Kanyakumari as the novel begins. To discuss her family, her father Pattabi Iyer is working at income tax department and her mother is a homemaker. And we understand that Akila's mother had actually married her uncle because that is a Tamil custom where someone can marry their uncles. So it's a totally different kind of relationship that is happening here because we understand that the mother believes that there is nothing like equality and there is nothing like balance in a man woman relationship. The man always stands supreme. This is what her mother believes, and therefore, this couple never had any kind of bickerings or quarrels as we find in the novel. Now, Akila has got two brothers, Narayan and Narasimhan, and she also has got a sister whose name is Padma. Now, later, this Padma gets married to a man called Murthy, and they have two kids in this relationship, Madhavi and Priya. Now, we realize that Akila was leading a very comfortable life initially, but unfortunately, her father dies in an accident. Pattabi Iyer gets knocked down by a bus and he dies, but on compassionate ground, Akila gets a job at the income tax department. And soon afterwards, we find that Akila becomes the pillar of the family. She has to take care of her mother, two brothers, and her sister. And finally, she forgets about her. Her sister gets married, the two brothers get married, finally, her mother dies, she is left alone, but still, we understand that she always thought about her family and society, and during this period, she actually forgets about to live life in her own way. Now, there is another character named Nilofer who is a friend of Akila, and it is Nilofer who actually books the tickets for Akila. This is a neighbor of Akila and her family, Sarazamami and Subramani Iyer, and they also belong to the same Brahminical code of life as a neighbor. They have a daughter whose name is Jaya. Now, the story goes in a parallel way here because Subramani Iyer dies all of a sudden one day. And Sarasa Mami and the daughter Jaya is left alone, and it becomes very difficult for them even to sustain with food, clothes, and shelter. And in such a scenario, on a compulsive basis, Jaya becomes a prostitute. She never wanted to become a prostitute, but she is forced to get into this kind of prostitution because they have to survive. And as a result of this, they are completely excommunicated from the society as well as from their religious codes. Now, there is a situation where Akila finds Sarazamami and Jaya standing at a bus stop, and Akila is planning to go and talk to them. But her mother tells her not to do this because even the mother of Akila believes that they have sinned. So we understand how society looks at people from society's own perspective. Akila even tells her mother that this would have been the very same situation at their home if Akila never got a job. So this story of Sarzamami and Jaya, it runs as a parallel story with Akila's story. Now there is another character called Catherine Weber, another friend of Akila. She works with Akila. She is an Anglo-Indian and she has been transferred from Bangalore. She is planning to migrate to Australia. So there comes a very fine relationship between Akila and Catherine, and it was Catherine who initiates Akila to eating eggs. Akila, being a part of the Brahminical family, she never used to eat non vegetarian food, including egg. But Catherine introduces eggs to Akila and she starts relishing on eating eggs. Now, there is a most important character coming here, that is Hari. That is the love life of Akila. Now, Hari is 28 years old and he is a North Indian from Madhya Pradesh. He is working as a draftsman at the railway company here, and she meets Hari from the train because Akila travels to the income tax department every morning through trains. So initially, a friendship begins, and this friendship slowly moves into a love relationship, and it reaches to an extent where they go together and stay together in a beach resort, and they even consummate their relationship. Now, Hari is just 28 years old, and Akila is older than Hari, and this creates a complex in the mind of Akila. And finally, she plans to withdraw from him completely. She says goodbye to him and she leaves him because she is more worried about what the family might think about her or what the society might think about her. Now, even after they split up, Hari keeps sending her letters every new year, including the phone number, the contact number, and the address. But Akila never responds to this. Now, there is one more character, that is Karupagam, who is a classmate of Akila, and years later, Akila meets Karupagam very accidentally. Karupagam looks like a very cheerful lady with parted hair, sindoor, and bright colored saris. But later on, Akila learns that Karupagam is a widow, but the way she carries herself is very different from the normal codes of society. And it was Karupagam who tells Akila and gives her courage to lead a life of her own. So this is Akila's story. So standing from this kind of a situation, Akila decides to begin her journey to Kanyakumari, and it is during this journey that she comes across the other five characters. So let's have a brief look at the other five characters. The first one is Janaki, and the chapter title is A Certain Age. Now Janaki is married and she has a son Siddharth. Siddharth is also married. Siddharth is married to Jaya and they have a daughter. So Janaki was married at the age of 18, at a very young age, and her husband was 27 when they got married. It was a very happy life, a contented life, but years later she starts questioning her relationship and she understands that her husband is very caring, very affectionate, but at the same time bossy too. And she remembers an incident with their son Siddharth when all of them go together to buy a pair of shoes for Siddharth. Siddharth is in his adolescence and Siddharth is planning to buy a pair of shoes, but here His father continuously interferes in his choice, which means Siddhartha is not actually given a choice even to select his own pair of shoes. Now, Janaki becomes really irritated about this situation and she walks away from the shop. So, there are situations where Janaki feels that everything is not completely right in her married life. Now, she also thinks about the situation which ultimately made her land into this lady's coupe. She is into a second class compartment now, and she thinks how she came into this because she had actually gone along with her husband to visit their son Siddharth. Now, Siddharth, who's a grown up man, a married man now, always try comparing Janaki with his mother in law, that is Jaya's mother. So he continuously complains about his mother, and he even tells that the father had actually spoiled and pampered his mother. So there happens a kind of a quarrel between the parents and the son. So they had actually planned to stay for one more week with their son's place, Siddharth's place, but with the beginning of these kind of quarrels, the parents, Janaki and her husband, they decide to return home the very next day. And that is how they get into this second class compartment. So when we look at Janaki, we understand that she is very conventional. She was always looked after by men. Her father took care of her initially, then her husband took care of her. Now her son is taking care of her. So she has never been independent. So, in a way, she is like Ibsen's Nora in Doll's House. She is very docile and silent, and she is just like a puppet in the hands of her husband. Now, this is a story of Janaki. Now, moving on to the next one, this is the story of Sheila Vasudevan, and the chapter title is Go Grandmother Go. She is presented as a disillusioned teenager, a young teenager, and she has got a very deep admiration and affection for her grandmother, whom she calls as Amoma. Now, she describes that her grandmother is very meticulous and very different from her parents. Now, she has a very close connection with her parents. Her father actually treats her like a princess. So, she is very much pampered within her house. Now, she talks about her grandmother. She says that her grandmother is very meticulous and very organized. Her grandmother, Amuma, is very different from her Achama. Her Achama is actually her father's mother. So she makes a comparison and she says that when Achama comes and stays with them, nobody knows about Achama's presence because Achama easily blends into everything. But she says her Amuma is different because Amuma has got her own disciplines and her own systematic schemes, which means she actually sets a code within the house. So she has got a deep admiration for her grandmother, and her grandmother is right now with her because she is undergoing a treatment because of a malignancy and she is hospitalized. So she discusses the elegance and meticulousness of her grandmother, Amoma, and this Amoma always looked very neat and clean. She always dressed up herself. She wore beautiful jewelry. So we can see that she was a lady who lived her life in the right way as she wanted. Now, meanwhile, she is also disappointed about another fact that her father has changed. Because with the grandmother staying with them for her treatment, her mother's relatives have started pouring in one by one, and with all the confusion and drama going on at the house, her father completely changes. Because the father starts venting out his emotions towards Sheila and he scolds her every now and then. Now, she is very unhappy about this part which is happening in her life. Now, as things move on, we find that her grandmother dies, and when her grandmother dies, it was Sheila who actually goes and dresses her up. She makes her wear good jewelry, good dress, everything, and the other people around her really feel that this is really awkward. But Sheila says that this is not awkward because her grandmother was always a very organized person and wanted everything to be in the perfect order. So Sheila feels that she had done justice to her grandmother during the last rite. So, in short, we understand that she is a frustrated teenager, and it is soon after her grandmother's death that she gets into the ladies' coupe. Coming to the next character, this is Margaret Shanti, and the chapter title is Oil of Vitriol. Now we see that she is a chemistry teacher. She is married to a man named Ebenezer Paulraj, and he is the principal of the very same school. So they are actually working in the very same institution. We understand that this was a love marriage, but with the passage of time, we see that their love marriage actually moves into a loveless marriage. And she describes her story. Now, Margaret Shandy conceives for the first time, but she was asked to do an abortion by her husband. Her husband never wanted a baby then, and therefore she is convinced of going for an abortion and she loses the first baby. She never thinks about it at that time, but later she realizes that what she had done was a great mistake, a grave mistake in killing her own child. So she feels that she should not have listened to her husband, and from this instance onwards, she starts creating a vengeance towards her husband. Moreover, the love marriage which happened slowly breaks into a loveless marriage. Now, it is also understood that Ebenezer Paul Raj is a very active man, so he is very busy with his college teachers, meetings, etc., while Margaret is completely stuck within the walls of the home because mentally she becomes disturbed and psychologically she disapproves what she had done. So, though she is a working lady, she still is not able to be happy completely because of the sin that she committed, because she never wanted an abortion then. So now she starts taking a revenge against her husband, and the way in which she moves on with her revenge is rather very comical because she starts taking revenge against him in a totally different mode. She starts feeding her husband continuously with extremely delicious food until he becomes a very fat man. And once he becomes a very fat man, he becomes totally a lethargic person. And once, when he becomes lethargic, totally devoid of any activities, Margaret tries to resettle with her relationship. So slowly she starts connecting with him, and slowly their relationship once again gets lighted, and finally she conceives and she gives birth to a daughter. So here we see that she is a lady who had tried different methods to take revenge against her husband. So, in short, we can call her as a rebellious wife who undertook revenge against her husband. So it was Margaret Shandy who tells Akila that a woman can live independently according to her whims and fancies. So now comes the next character. This is Prabha Devi, and the chapter title is Afloat. Now, Prabha Devi comes from a very rich family. She is married to Jagadish and she has got two children, Nitya and Vikram. So she comes from a very affluent family and she has led a luxurious life as a child. Now we see that her father had a number of jewelries and she was the fifth girl born to four brothers. So she comes from a very rich atmosphere. Now, she gets married to Jagadish at an early age, and Jagadish is actually the son of a diamond merchant. So you can imagine the kind of life that they might have been going through with jewelries and diamond business. She was also convent educated and she knows to speak good English, so she is very different from the other characters which had been mentioned earlier. Now, after marriage, she undertakes a trip to New York with her husband, and this trip completely changes her. Once she returns, we can see that she completely brings a change in her clothing, her hairstyle, the kind of makeup that she uses, everything changes. So outwardly, Prabhadevi now becomes a very attractive, very refined, very fashionable kind of lady. She starts wearing Western dresses, modern dresses. She starts visiting the parlors. She tries different makeup. She even visits the clubs along with her husband Jagadish. And she gets into a mode where she wanted other people to look at her and enjoy her attractiveness and her beauty. Now, there is another guy named Pramod whom she happens to meet at the club, but Pramod ignores her completely initially. And Prabhadevi gets really worried about this because she wants other men to look at her. So finally, she tries different ways to make Pramod look at her, and this situation leads into another kind of incident which completely changes her. Now, one day, Pramod visits her home, and when he knows that there is nobody in the house, he starts taking advantage of Prabhadevi's body. Prabhadevi slaps him, and this incident completely changes her. She starts recoiling, she stops going outside, she stops visiting the clubs, and she finally decides to have kids. So, this was something which completely changed her. And later, she gets into a complete home mode where she gives birth to the two children, Nitya and Vikram. She completely becomes a homemaker. Years later, when her children grow up, we realize that a new interest begins in her, and this new interest is to learn the art of swimming. And swimming, as we all know, like driving, is something which you have to practice. And without practice, this is an art which you cannot acquire. But with Prabha Devi's conditions, we understand that she goes to the swimming classes along with her children as a parent, as a mother, and notices what the people do there in the swimming pools. She watches this for a number of days, and finally, on one day, when there is nobody around, she gets into the swimming pool and she swims. So here we can see how she actually succeeds in swimming even though she never got any practice in it. But still, she is able to do that because she was so much adamant about her passion with swimming. So, this finally makes us understand that what a woman requires is not a physical transformation, but it is a psychological transformation. Initially, we saw Prabhadevi changing on an outward basis, changing her clothes, changing her hairstyle, changing her makeup, but she was not happy with that eventually. But we see that there comes a psychological transformation when she starts spending her time on her passion, on what she liked. So, from her story, it is very clear that what a woman requires is not a physical transformation but a psychological transformation. So, coming to the last part, this is a story of Marikolundu, and the chapter title is Sister to the Real Thing. Now, Marikolundu comes from a very backward family. Her father and her mother, they work together in fields, and they try to meet the ends because they don't have enough money to feed all the children. Now, Marikolundu has got two brothers, and they are Ishwaran and Shivakumar. And we see that her father dies all of a sudden, which creates a lot of troubles in her family because the entire family is dependent on the father, and the mother and the children are now left alone. So, we see how these situations will finally make her succumb to the kind of society that we all live in today. Now, there is another house which is named as Chettiar Fort, which is in the same vicinity. And this Chettiar Fort is a very huge house, and this Chettiar is a person who actually has got a lot number of business establishments. He has got a silkworm industry, he has got many other business. So this is actually one of the most richest families in that locality. Now, to speak a few words regarding Chettiar Fort, there is Chettiar who is remaining there in the house, the head of the family, and there is Chettiar's wife. Now, Chettiar's wife was locked up in the upstairs room because she is completely insane. Now, the Chettiar has got three sons. The first one is Rajendran, and his wife is Rani. Now, Rani, though she is the eldest daughter in law in the family, Rani is not given any kind of particular position because she has given birth to a girl. So, these kind of customs, which are a part of the society, is once again reflected by the author here. The second one is Sridhar, the second son of Chettiar, and Sridhar's wife is Sujata. Now, Sujata is actually the all in all at Chettiar Fort, because Sujata comes from a very rich family, and Sujata has given birth to a boy, which is very important. She has given birth to a boy whose name is Prabhu. Now, and the youngest son of Chettiar. He is actually in Madras. He is studying. So this is about the Chettiar family, and the Chettiar family has got a number of servants and maids. Now, once when Marikulanda's father dies, there is no other option for them to survive. Marikulanda's mother, Kanagambaram, goes and works as a maid at Chettiar fort. So we see that there is another character there in between. We'll come to it. Before that, at Kanchipuram is where the place where Rani's house is there, Rajendran's wife Rani, and moreover, Chettiar has also got a number of business establishments at Kanchipuram too. So this place becomes really important in the next session. We'll come to it later. Now, meanwhile, there is another character called Rukmini who is another maid working in the Chettiar fort. So it is Rukmini who gives details regarding all these characters at Chettiar fort to Kanagambaram. And since Kanagambaram is working at Chettiar fort now, her daughter Marikolanda often visits the place. Now, Marikolanda becomes very close with Sujada, Sridhar's wife, and Sujada asks if Marikolanda can remain with her in order to take care of her child, who is a toddler, that is Prabhu. So Marikulanda agrees. So we see both the mother and the daughter will be working in the same situation, same atmosphere here. Kanagambaram is working as a maid at Chettiar Fort, and Marikulanda now is working as a babysitter for Sujada's baby Prabhu. So there strikes a very fine friendship between Marikulanda and Sujata, and as a result, Sujata tells Marikulanda that there is a new option for Marikulanda, so that she can go to Vellore and work with two doctors whose names are Missy K and Missy V. They are doctors from England. So if Marikulanda can go and work with them at Vellore, she can definitely get a lot of money so that she can support her family. Now Marikulanda agrees, and she goes to Vellore with the two doctors, and from Vellore, she meets the gardener at the house whose name is Periyasamy, and she clicks a very good friendship with Periyasamy. She gets adjusted with the town life, with the city life. As things go in such a way, we understand one day Marikulanda's brothers come to meet her at Vellore because her mother is bedridden now. There is a bone crack which happened, and her mother is bedridden, and therefore Marikulanda is asked to come back home. So she takes leave for 2 3 weeks. She tells the doctors and she returns to her home, and she stays at her home. And it is at this time that she again rekindles her friendship with Sujata. Meanwhile, another thing which happens is that on a festival day, when Marikulanta was about to visit the Chettiar fort, on the way from a mango orchard, a guy named Murugeshan. Now, Murugeshan is actually Rajendran's brother in law. Murugeshan is Rani's brother from Kanchipuram. Now, Murugeshan has also come here for the festival, which is happening at the Chettiar fort, and unfortunately, Murugeshan meets Marikulanda at the mango orchard and he rapes her. And we see that Marikulanda never gets any help from anybody around. She screams, she cries, but nobody can hear her because there is a festival and a celebration which is going on at the Chettiar fort. So Murugeshan rapes her, and within a few months, she realizes that she is pregnant. She talks about this incident to Sujata, but Sujata cannot help her. She tries a lot to speak by speaking to her husband Sridhar, but they don't entertain Sujata's little talks, and finally, that is completely out of question. Now, Marikulunda is carrying right now. She goes to a lady named Periyamami because she has certain methods by which the child can be killed from the womb. So, a lot of herbal medicines are given to Marikulunda, but to top it all, nothing happens to the child, and the child comes out as a very healthy baby, and the baby is named as Muthu. Now, Marikulanda is not at all interested to take care of the baby, so she leaves the baby with her mother. She even calls it as it. She is not even ready to call a name for the baby. She entrusts the baby with her mother and she goes back to Vellore. Now, by the time she goes back to Velu, she realizes that the relationship between Missy K and Missy V had been completely spoiled. Now, there was a very peculiar kind of relationship that happened between Missy K and Missy V, and we have to assume that that was a homosexual kind of relationship. But by the time Marikulanda is returning, she realizes that Missy K and Missy V is almost on a stage of breaking up. Missy K is planning to return, and Missy V is totally against her returning. So there comes a clash between them, and things are not in the very same way. That's what we understand from the situations right at Vellore. Now, Marikolando continues her life there. As things move on, she understands that Missy V, as Missy K is planning to move out, Missy V is going to settle down at Bangalore. So they're shifting from Vellore. So before they move, Missy V tells Marikolanda that if she is interested, she can come back and join her at Bangalore. So now Marikolanda returns to her homeland, again back to the same place, her home. Now by this time we realize that her two brothers are already married. Muthu is a grown-up baby, and Muthu is still with Marikolanda's mother. And now the Chettiar is no more, but his wife is still there. Now Rajendran and Rani, they have shifted to Kanchipuram. The youngest son is still in Madras. So now the head of the family at Chettiar Fort is Rajendran. Sorry, that is Sridhar. And Sujata is actually the one who's the queen at Chettiar Fort now. So Marikolanda and Sujata, their friendship continues, and Sujata asks if Marikolanda can come and help her to look after her mother-in-law, that is Chettiar's wife. Now, Marikolanda agrees and she joins Sujata at Chettiar Fort. Now, you can see that except Chettiar's insane wife, there is nobody else in the house because Sridhar goes for work at early mornings. So now there comes a specific relationship that happens between Marikolanda and Sujata on having some kind of notes on homosexuality. So this relationship actually moves on. Meanwhile, the Chettiar's wife, Sujata's mother-in-law, dies, and there is nobody else in the house. As things move on, Sujata starts speaking about the worries that she has got about her husband. Now, Sujata says that she is always worried whether Sridhar would get into relationship with other women, because Chettiar had a relationship with another lady whose name is Sita Lakshmi, and this is a news which we understand from the maid Rukmini. So Sujata knows about the relationship that her father-in-law had with Sita Lakshmi, and because of that, Sujata says she is worried if Sridhar too might get into such a kind of relationship. Now, a few months later, Sujata realizes that Marikolanda was having a relationship with Sridhar because they used to share the bed and Sridhar used to sleep with Marikolanda. After knowing this, Sujata really gets angry and she asks Marikolanda to leave. So now there is no other option left for Marikolanda. Meanwhile, her mother dies. Marikolanda's mother dies. The child Muthu is left alone. Ishwaran and Shivakumar, both of them have been married and they don't want to look after Muthu. So Muthu becomes Marikolanda's responsibility now. So what she does is Marikolanda takes Muthu and goes to Kanchipuram because she knows that at Kanchipuram, Murugeshan is in charge of the silkworm industry now. It is Murugeshan's place. She goes to this loom and she actually trades the boy. She trades the boy for money. She says that the boy can work in this loom and instead she takes some money and she plans that she can conduct the surgery because she is having a growth in her womb. So she's planning to conduct the surgery with the money and she hands over the baby, not a baby, a young boy to this loom. As she walks back, she gets the news that Murugeshan has died. Murugeshan has died and the procession is coming. So in a way, Marikolanda becomes very happy because she knows that it was Murugeshan who actually spoiled her life and therefore she enjoys the burial which happens in front of her. And she also notices that Muthu, who is a working boy at the loom, is the one who's preparing all the necessary arrangements there without knowing that he is actually setting the funeral pyre of his own father. So she gets into a kind of happiness by witnessing Murugeshan's death, his funeral pyre. But at the same time, we understand that she feels ashamed for not having given enough care to the son Muthu. So she decides that she will go back to Bangalore with the doctor. She stays there, she will work there, she will make some money, and she will take her son back home. So finally, she gets connected with her son as her story ends. So these are the different stories that Akhila listens to, and in the final chapter, that is chapter 11, now gets a title that is Akhila Speaks. So it is this incident which ultimately triggers a change in Akila. So, listening to the stories of all these characters, she finally reaches Kanyakumari. She stays alone in the hotel and she feels a wind of freedom now because now she has transformed completely. She wakes up as a new woman, and as the story ends, we find that she is ringing Hari. So the story, the novel, actually comes to an end on a positive note with optimism striking hard because she is ringing Hari, and hopefully we can believe that they might get married and live happily ever after. So this is how the story ends. Thank you very much for your patient listening. Thanks a lot. Please do connect with me if you have any queries or suggestions in my email ID. So thank you very much. Thank you once again.